Coco the Clown, that famous British icon. Hey everybody, welcome back to Business Blaze. I, as always, am your host, Simon, and in this one was what I really wanted to do. This is my idea. If you've got a suggestion for a future video, use the comment section below. This one is all about £50 notes. What this is basically all about, there is a £50 note in the UK, but no one uses it. It's rarely ever there, and I wanted to really dig into why that was and kind of just investigate that a little bit. So that's what we're doing. My shirt is really far undone. I'm just gonna do that up. It's a warm day. This has been put together by Danny. Thank you, Danny. We're going to be diving in. I love how he's come up with some optional titles for me here. I think the Frowned Upon 50 was the title that I originally came up with, which I rather like, but he's also come up with some other smashers. 50 Shades of Pay, the never spending story of the £50 note. What's the point of a banknote if it's practically invisible? Ask anyone in the UK when they last used a £50 note, and the average man on the street would claim he couldn't remember the last time he actually saw one, never mind spent one. I can. And I was maybe 11 years old. It was a long time ago. My grandma lives in Johannesburg in South Africa. She came over to visit and she gave, I've got 3 sisters, she gave each of us a £50 note. That was the only time, until at that age, I don't think I'd ever seen a £50 note. It was the only one I've ever had. I saw a few more later. I worked in a newsagent's where I saw like one. I worked at a Sainsbury's supermarket and I don't think I saw any. And I remember when I got one in the newsagent, I phoned up my boss and was like, I got a £50 note. Do we accept these? And he's like, yeah, but you got to use this like special magical pen and scanner on it or whatever. Most British ATMs don't dispense them. Never had one from an ATM. Many shops won't accept them. That's true. Even if you had one in your hand, it would be pretty difficult to get rid of the damn thing. Despite their alleged scarcity and status as the rarest note in UK circulation, there's a surprising number of them floating around in the system. In fact, according to the Bank of England's own statistics, there are a whopping 344 million of them in circulation for a grand total of £17.2 billion. But I don't really know how much that is. So basically this means there are a lot of them. They're just hidden somewhere, or they're not in common circulation, so people are using them as like a way to hold money off the grid. I get the feeling we're going to be diving into that later, because the £50 note in the UK's got, if you use one, I would feel weird using one, because it's like people would then instantly assume, well, you're either a drug dealer or a tax evader, Simon, so which one is it? Both bad. So what's the big problem with the enigmatic £50 note, and why is it seen as a problem when it does make a rare appearance? Could it really be true that the £50 note is essentially just the currency of drug dealers and tax evaders? Exactly, this is what it's seen as being. Let's take a look at the kind of thing that happens when you try to spend one of them in a store. I don't remember how I spent the one that my gran gave me. I probably just changed it for like 2 20s and a 10 with my dad or mum, but it's perfectly understandable when a shop assistant refuses to accept your £50 note as payment when you're only buying a carton of milk for £1. You'd be completely wiping out the change in their till for the rest of the day, and that's not a problem unique to the £50 note either. Many store assistants will simply wince at the sight of a £20 note when you actually are only buying a packet of mints. It's generally seen as bad form to try and use a high-value note for something worth peanuts, like, say, peanuts. Very funny. I think this is true. Like, you will, and I don't find this in other countries. How is this in other countries? This is the great thing about YouTube. Let me know what country you're in, and whether if you go into a store and use if you use a $100 bill to buy like something worth $5, do people fuss in the States? I don't know, I don't feel they do, because I have been to cash machines in the US and they just give you $100 and it's like nothing. It's a lot of money, but it's not a big deal. But a friend of mine, we're getting a story, Danny. A friend of mine recently went into a hardware store and he bought goods worth a total of £53. He thought it would be perfectly acceptable in a case like this to buy the goods with a £50 note and loose change. I'm already like, all right, Danny, so what's your friend? A drug dealer? Tax evader, Danny? Anyway, sounds reasonable, apparently not. He was turned down flat, and for a very different reason. It was the shop's policy to not accept £50 notes ever. And this is a common policy. There used to be signs, I think there still are signs that say we don't, minimum spend on a card, £5. We don't accept £50 notes. This is super common. Sadly, this is not an unusual case. That's absolutely right. In fact, it can prove very difficult to find any business that will take a £50 note off your hands. It's true. Contrary to the belief of some angry customers, these shops aren't breaking any laws by refusing legal tender. The term legal tender only has a very loose meaning in UK law. Any transaction is a private decision made between you and the other party, and there is no legal obligation for the other party to accept your choice of currency, whether it's a £50 note, a £20 note, or a bag of magic beans. It's simply a matter of discretion. In my mind, I thought this wasn't true because I'm like, no, they have to accept your money. If you've got money, it's good for buying things. And I think there's this rumor like that in the UK you can use stamps to buy things because they're technically legal tender. This is just one of those myths. Like, legally, that's not how the process works. Like, under British law, when you go into a shop and you see things for sale, they're not making you an offer. They're making you something called an invitation to treat. And so then you go to the till, and bizarrely, the person at the till makes you an offer then, and then you accept it. So the process would be, here's my Snickers bar. The person at the till's like, okay, I offer to sell you this for 50p. And then you say, okay, I accept your offer to sell this to me for 50p. So they have to offer it to you. So they can always refuse, which is a common misconception. I said I worked in a newsagent. Some woman once came in and said, that packet of cigarettes you say it's £1 when it's really £8. You've labeled it wrong. I want it for £1. That's the law. And I'm like, no, lady, that's not the law. Get the out. I didn't say that or I've got fired. But she was very angry. She was like, no, I know the law. And I was like, no, you don't. The risk of accepting counterfeit notes is obviously a very big problem. It's bad enough for a business to get stuck with a fake 10 or a fake 20, but you're talking big losses when you start accepting £50 notes. Just one counterfeit 50 could potentially be a massive blow to the daily takings of a small shop. It's true. I mean, small shops work on tiny margins. That newsagent I worked at, you're talking like a few percent. And, you know, if you take in a few grand a day, £50, that's a lot of money. Sure, a business could implement a tight security system with which a store assistant checks the notes under ultraviolet and uses a pen test, which is what I did with that 50 when I worked at that store, and then seek authorization from the Queen. That is not something I did, but we did have her on speed dial. But these are time-consuming measures for a busy store, and many businesses just feel it's not worth the hassle for the high risk. It's far easier just not to accept the payment and make it the customer's problem to come up with a better form of payment. I don't know, like a credit card maybe, or like Apple Pay?
How innovative! I like it!
Now when I buy like chewing gum, I'll use my card. The counterfeit problem is further aggravated by a general lack of familiarity with a £50 note in the first place. The average UK citizen very rarely sees one of them. If a store assistant is barely even likely to recognize a genuine note, they are going to have an even bigger challenge trying to identify a fake. This is true. Like, on one side we have the Queen, on the other side we have notable figures. It's about to be Alan Turing. I couldn't tell you who's on the £50 note. I had a feeling it was Edward Elgar, the composer, but then I think he was on the old 20. But I really don't know. A customer could hand over a bright pink note. I know it's red. I definitely know it's red. Bright pink note depicting Coco the Clown riding a unicorn into space. Coco the Clown, that famous British icon. Some store assistants may be tempted to assume that it's the real deal. Well, they'd have to be a bit slow, Danny, wouldn't they? To tackle the problem of why £50 notes are so rare in public, we need to go back to the source of them. Most cash in the UK is withdrawn from ATMs, and most ATMs in the UK simply don't dispense them. You could, of course, request a withdrawal of £50 notes from inside the bank, and that is the main route through which £50 notes get into circulation in the first place. But the overwhelming majority of bank customers prefer to avoid the hassle of standing in line in a queue in a bank. They just go to the ATM instead. This is the thing, they never enter the system. But then so many do, so it clearly at some point, someone's got to be going into the bank and be like, hi, yeah, I need like 10 grand. And they're like, do you accept 50s? And I'm like, well, it's just going to my dodgy plumber. So yeah, it's just going to pay for like hundreds of kilograms of cocaine. So just stack them high, boys. Despite the fact that the average cash withdrawal in the UK is around £70, most ATMs won't spit out £50 notes. And this is a problem just unique to the UK. Over on the continent, ATMs will happily dispense €50 and even €100 notes, while it's an everyday occurrence to withdraw $100 bills from a US cash machine. Yeah, I found that. Like, I went to the US, you take out a couple $100, it can give you like $200 bills. They also have €200 notes out of cash machines. I once withdrew €200 from a cash machine in Europe, and they gave me a €200 note, which is a strange denomination. There's also a 500, which I've seen twice, but I think they banned it because of drugs and crime. When you get these huge notes, that's just what they're used for. It's like, what's the 500 note for? Crimes. Mostly crimes. But apart from a few token Barclay ATMs in London, your chance of getting a £50 note from an ATM in the UK is close to zero. Reason? Well, for starters, counterfeit money is a significantly bigger problem in the UK than the rest of the world. I didn't know that. Which goes some way to explaining why other countries don't get quite so squeamish about high-value notes. Which is weird, like I feel like UK notes are really secure. Like I look at US notes, and there's a couple of problems. Well, they're all the same size, they're all the same color, they don't have a ton of security features. I mean, the modern ones of course do, but the fact that you can use a note from like the 1960s today, and that just doesn't have the security features that a modern note has is weird. weird. Like, you can't use, they change the notes, I don't know, every 10 years maybe in the UK, so they all look completely different. Now they're made out of plastic. And you can't use the old ones after a while. You have to go to a bank to exchange them. Like, when I was working in that shop, this is more like Simon's personal story about working in a shop episode. Some guy came in, he was a Canadian guy, and he came in with a bunch of like, it was Edward Elgar, it was Edward Elgar 20s. And he came in and was like, can I spend these here? And I'm like, dude, I haven't seen one of those since I was like 5. You cannot spend it here, but go across to the bank and they'll swap them out for you. The other main reason is a simple lack of demand from customers. According to Barclays, only 15% of customers withdraw money in £50 notes when given a choice. While the Royal Bank of Scotland recently axed a trial of dispensing £50 notes after facing a barrage of complaints from consumers. I feel this is strange. Like, if we all got into accepting them and using them, it would be a whole lot more useful, because we've had the same notes for what, like 40 years? When we had this change over to metric at some point and they changed all the money. We've had them for like 40 years, so the value of money has gone down insanely. So like a £50 note would be a useful note these days. Naturally, all of this leaves us facing a huge self-perpetuating problem. Shops don't accept them because nobody is familiar enough with them, customers don't want them because they're difficult to spend, ATMs don't dispense them because the bank customers don't want them, and vicious cycle. So if nobody is receiving or spending them, where are all the £50 notes hiding? According to some, including such notable figures as Peter Sands, the former chief executive of Standard Chartered Bank, which is a big bank, the £50 note is nothing more than the currency of corrupt elites, of crime of all sorts, and of tax evasion. And it plays very little role in the legitimate economy, and it should be scrapped altogether. Yeah, this is kind of definitely the popular opinion. It's certainly true to say that the £50 note seems to be the favored currency for criminal activities. Dodgy plumbers, builders, or tradesmen who don't fancy getting taxed on their earnings will often request payments in cash and keep the transactions away from the eyes of the taxman, while the customer gets the added incentive of VAT costs. Yeah, exactly. And I think this is where they come into circulation, because the person paying from it just goes into the bank, gets a wad of cash to pay their dodgy builders or whatever, and it's, that's when the 50s come into circulation. It may sound like small fry, but the UK economy loses billions of pounds every year from tax and VAT evasion, much of which can be pinned to cash-in-hand trade. It doesn't seem like a small fry problem. This is a big problem. On a darker note, the £50 note is frequently used by drug dealers who conceal their wealth and their activities by trading in high-value notes with complete anonymity and no official record of transactions. Yeah, I mean, in a digital world, like, things can be tracked, right? Like drug dealers and stuff, they don't want bank accounts. I guess they can launder the... This is just based on my knowledge of Breaking Bad. They can launder the money and then get it like legit, but cash works. There's another big chunk of perfectly innocent people who tend to get lumbered with a £50 note, and that's unsuspecting tourists like my grandma from Johannesburg. This is what I reckon happened to her. For some reason, the currency exchange shops tend to deal with big quantities of high-value notes. If they try to palm them off to UK citizens returning from a holiday abroad, they'll likely get a polite refusal and a request for smaller notes. I can imagine just like, I come back from the US or whatever, I trade in some dollars. Not that I would ever do this. I just pay with card. You go to the exchange shop and he tries to give you £50 notes, I'd be like, nah mate, give me some lower bills. Like, that's just not gonna happen. But it's much easier to cheerfully hand them out to tourists who have no idea how much trouble they're going to get when they try to spend them. So if the £50 note is only being used by criminals, tax evaders, and unlucky tourists, shouldn't it have been taken out of circulation years ago? Yes, Daddy, that's my big question. I do wonder. Well, here's the thing. One day the £50 note will disappear forever, but only along with every other British banknote when the UK finally enters the era of a completely cashless society, and that's gonna be pretty soon. I agree. I think we're already kind of heading there. Everyone pays by card or Apple Pay. In the meantime, for as long as UK citizens are still using cash, the Bank of England remains fully committed to providing a mix of coins and notes from small to high value for years and years to come. Well, there we go. So the £50 note, it's here to stay for a long while yet. Just don't expect to see one very often. And brace yourself for a headache if you happen to find one inside your wallet. Now we got some bonus facts, by the way. They say that money doesn't grow on trees, but it can certainly help to grow trees. Millions of old banknotes are destroyed by the Bank of England every year, and many of them are turned into compost. Compost? Compost? The £50 note may be the highest value note you're ever likely to see, but the 1 million and even £100 million notes do exist. That's cool. However, they're safely locked away in the vaults of the Bank of England and are simply used to play a role in the financial system by backing the value of everyday notes. I don't know how that works, but it's cool that they exist. I wish I could expand on that, really. Maybe I should expand on that. Would you like to hear about that in a future video? I love banknotes. I find the whole banknote thing super interesting. If anyone's got cool stories about banknotes or anything like that, I know India tried to get rid of a bunch of banknotes at one point and it all went horribly wrong. If you want to hear about stories like that or have their own suggestions, let me know in the comments below, or just a random business suggestion for this channel. Let me know, we'll get it written up, we'll learn it together, it'll be fun, and I'll see you next time. Oh, like, subscribe, smash that like button, all that. See you next time.